Now we're going to move on to the data, research data, data collection and data analysis and assessment perhaps. But let's see how far we can go with this data episode. And in data, what can data be? Data, of course, is plural. Datum is singular, and data and data is another British and American pronunciation. So data can be spoken, i.e. recorded, or it can be written, or it can be non-verbal, i.e. just pictures, or signs that are non-verbal, non-linguistic signs. Some of this data can be is primary, which means you're collecting it through interviews or transcriptions of their dialogue or questionnaire, and they can be responses from various people, or it can be translations as well, etc. That's a primary. But the secondary is collecting it from other researchers who have done it already, and you are just collecting it. It's called corpora or corpus, the corpus that you're using. So either primary, which means you are doing the collection of the data, or the data already existed and it's collected by other researchers and you are only commenting on that. Now, sufficient data collection depends on what? It depends on the methodology, depends on the research question, and we covered that before, and I've explained to you what is methodology, and also the hypothesis. Hypothesis here, one of them that you have got in mind, or maybe hypotheses. So it's either hypothesis, one hypothesis, or hypotheses in plural. And of course, the time allocation that you adjust for when was the data collected, and the data analysis, whether you are actually individual or team work is doing the analysis, or the analysis is done automatically by a machine because it might be too big. So either individually you are analyzing them, or using a team with you, or automatic. And here you have the issue of validity and credibility, which are very important. These are two important. Valid means, is it true? And credible means, is it believable? Now, types of data that you're collecting can be either structured or semi-structured or unstructured. Now, structured means it is used in quantitative research, represented numerically and analyzed statistically through questionnaire surveys. So basically, the quantitative is numerical. You are using statistics, and you are analyzing them using a questionnaire or a survey. That's the kind of data that you have, which is structured. And there's also semi-structured or unstructured data, which is used in qualitative research through interviews. So you do interviews. When you are doing interviews, you are doing semi-structured collection of data. And that is in qualitative research that you do, not quantitative. So you need to actually, you need to state when you are actually doing the research, the study, you need to state at the very beginning of the study and say, my approach is going to be quantitative research. And I'm collecting data, for example, from surveys and questionnaires. So that is quite a quantitative approach, where you have statistics and numerical data with you to analyze, whether you individually analyze it or with a group or by a machine. Or you can do it unstructured. In other words, you do an interview or interviews, and you are actually, and that is linked to the qualitative research, qualitative approach, which is the approach where you are using interviews. I have mentioned many times about what is quantitative and qualitative, and what is called mixed approaches to research. There's a quantitative approach, and there is qualitative approach. There are two approaches that are being used: qualitative and quantitative, and then also there is both quantitative, qualitative research mixed. Let's look at the first one, which is the quantitative one. A quantitative translation research includes corpus analysis. You have lots of texts that you are analyzing. Or it can be eye tracking, as in audiovisual, i.e. you're watching you are actually putting a machine on the translator and trying to see how the subtitler is doing things. So you monitor them. Or it can be keystroke logging. In other words, what are you doing on the computer, on the actual keyboards? How many times you are hitting the keyboard and logging in. So keystrokes. It can be any other. There are lots of other ones. So that's the first one. The qualitative research, the first one was the quantitative, where it relies on numericals and also relies on statistics. This one is qualitative research, translation research, which includes critical discourse analysis. That's qualitative research. And interviews. You can use interviews in that. And also you can use focus groups. And you can use questionnaires, inductive and deductive, in your approach. And we have talked about what is the difference between inductive and deductive. Inductive, you give them a specific text and they will deduct from it or induct from it or deduce from it the actual theory part or the principle behind them. Or deductive, you give them a theory and you want them to apply it in the questionnaires. And then you have a mixed method, and that includes both qualitative and quantitative research. This method mixes both. So it can start from qualitative phase and moves on to the quantitative phase. And here you first explore the data qualitatively, i.e. you look into the data itself without any numbers and any statistics. And then you follow it with a more focused quantitative analysis of the topic or the subtopic that you are using. There is another form where you start the opposite way, from the quantitative phase to the qualitative phase. And in this case, you start with exposing some trends that can then be further supported with qualitative data. Now, also, out of all these, you can go for triangulation, what's called triangulation, like from triangle, which is collection of a variety of data on the same phenomena and through different investigators and different methods to ensure validity and ensure that it's accurate. Now, what's the operational form of the research? There are four elements: unit of the data that you are collecting, unit of the analysis, how you are analyzing, and the measurable variables that you need to know about, and the operational definition of it all. So it goes round all of these together. Let's look at them one by one. Unit of data means you are looking at the macro level data, which is the cultural approach, let's say, which looks into, and of course, the macro level data, or data as they say. I'm just going to fix this one. It's incorrect to say looks. It should say look, because data is plural, not singular. So here we have macro level data or data, which is the cultural approach. And this data look into organizations. For example, if you want to look at associations in translation, like professional translator associations in translation studies, or you can look at countries. How do they do translation regarding the laws there, the country-specific laws regarding translation. Or it can be the systems, looking at literary polysystem. Or it can be also social entities, like, for example, translation practice within organizations, different organizations. So that is really the data or the unit of data that you are looking at, either organizations or countries or systems or social entities within organizations. The second one is the unit of the data, not the data. First one is the unit of analysis, and this is the unit of data, where you look at micro level, which is more specific level. The micro level is the linguistic approach. So the macro level is the cultural approach, okay? And we have looked at it first, cultural approach, where we look at the organizations, countries, systems, and social entities. whereas the data here is at a micro level, linguistic approach, where you look at individual translation strategies, for example, or you look at the word level and look at the specific procedures or strategies in a translated text. I would say it's not specific strategies, I would say procedures. And then you got the text here. You look at the time taken to translate a text. And that is a micro level data that you're looking at from a linguistic approach. In the unit of analysis, you look at the general analysis, if you are analyzing the text in general, or you look at specific analysis, which is looking at the lexical sentence or clause or phrase analysis. So it depends which approach are you using in terms of what you're analyzing. Are you analyzing the text as a whole, or are you analyzing specific clauses and sentences and phrases? The operation definition, of course, is an approach for gathering and analyzing data to turn an abstract idea into a measurable entity. So you're trying to see an idea or a theory, how you can see it measurable. And of course, according to one scholar, there are two crucial questions. One is, what influence do the researcher's beliefs and ideology have on the study? And the second one is, can the tools selected, can they measure the concept? This is another element. Now, the measurable variables that you are measuring, well, it's something, a variable is something that varies in some way that we seek to measure, we're trying to measure. It can be the quantitative research approach, which is, as I said before, quantitative means it is related to the numericals and statistics and analyzing them. And here you depend on variables, dependent variables, which is core concepts to be assessed, or independent variables, which are things that are manipulated to see what is the effect on dependent variables. And it can be compounding variables, which is variables that influence dependent and independent variables. On the other hand, there is the qualitative research or approach, which is relating to going into details about the specific topic without any numericals and statistics. And this research is constructed to indirectly measure unobservable variables. Actually, I should not split my infinitives, so I'm going to fix this to indirectly measure. I would say it differently. I would say it is going to be to measure here, constructed indirectly to measure variables indirectly. This is more. We don't want to split that. This is an American style of splitting your infinitives. You should not split your infinitives, and you should always keep your infinitives, the word to measure. Leave to measure together. Should not be split here. So I fixed another one of my mistakes here about variables. As we've seen, is quantitative research, which is dependent, independent variables, or compounding, which is both, and then qualitative research, which is constructed to measure unobservable variables indirectly. So in this case, what I have done here is I have covered for you all these elements relating to data. I started with what kind of data, what is data, or data can be spoken. You can collect data which is spoken, or you can collect it as written, as texts. Somebody's written it as a letter or whatever, or it can be non-verbal. Maybe it's pictures. Okay, some of the data can be primary. Primary means you are collecting all through interviews, manuscripts, transcriptions, questionnaires, responses, translations. What you are doing is a primary data that you're collecting. Then secondary, which is collected by other researchers, but you are analyzing that corpora yourself, which is the first one. Of course, sufficient data collection depends on, is it sufficient or not? Depends on the methodology, depends on the research questions that you put in, the hypothesis that you are actually looking into, the time allocation, how much time you've allocated for this, and also the data analysis. Are you doing it individually? Are you analyzing it individually or in team or automatically by a machine? And you need to see the validity of it and the credibility of it as well. And the types of data, as I said earlier, is structured, which means you're numerical and analyzed statistically through questionnaires and surveys, or unstructured or semi, which is the qualitative approach through interviews. So I talked about qualitative approach and quantitative approach, and the mixed one, and the quantitative one includes corpus analysis, quantitative corpus analysis, eye tracking, or keystroke logging when you are pressing on the keyboard and monitoring that. Then you have the qualitative research in translation, which includes discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, of course, critical interviews or focus groups that you're using, or questionnaires which are inductive or deductive. And deductive means from general to specific, and inductive from specific to the general level. And then in the mixed method, I said you can start from the qualitative to the quantitative phases, where you explore the data qualitatively first, and then you move on to the more focused quantitative research of the topic, analysis of the topic, or quantitative phase, which moves to the qualitative phase, and that is you start with some of the trends, and then you support that with some qualitative data. And then, of course, the triangulation, which is collecting data, or variety of data on the same phenomena. And then I mentioned about the operational part of the research, where you have unit of data that you're collecting, unit of analysis that you're looking at. You're looking also at the measurable variables, and you're looking at the operational definition of it as well. And when you're looking at the definition of it as well, you are looking at an approach for gathering and analyzing the data to turn an abstract theory into a measurable entity. And that's what you are trying to do here. And of course, what you're doing is you're seeing what influence do the researchers' beliefs and ideology have on the study, and can the tool selected measure the concept that the researcher wants to measure, of course. And that is what you are trying to do. When we go back to the actual unit of data, what are we doing? We're looking at the macro level data in translation studies, which means we're looking at the cultural approach. That is the macro data or data, where you're looking at the organization or the professional translation or translator associations, or you're looking at the countries and the country-specific laws regarding translation. What are the laws about the conditions, working conditions, and so on, the payment.